Hello, I'm Colin Gallagher, CEO at Onward and Upward, and you're listening to the Association Insights podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Association Insights podcast. I'm your host, Colin Gallagher, and today we're kicking off a special series focusing on Gen Z and younger professionals in the association space. I'm really excited for our first guest and our partner in making this series possible for the month of May. Today, I'll be talking with David Whited, Principal, Design Research and Strategy for Highland. Since 1999, Highland's team of researchers, strategists, designers, and developers has helped organizations launch and implement hundreds of digital products, turning their biggest uncertainties into opportunities for growth. And Highland is doing some really fascinating research in this space of younger professionals in the association world, which we're going to dive into today. So I'm really excited about that. But more about David, he began formalizing his passion for experience and design in a university setting. So a little bit different than some of our lifetime association folks and some great outside perspective. There, he led multiple teams of creatives and academics in the development of powerful institution-wide learning encounters for college and graduate students. And while working there, David learned the hardest, most interesting, and most valuable perspective to gain is the experience of the user or the customer. And he began to cultivate the research skills necessary to learn what he needed to learn to solve the problems he needed to solve. After a decade in higher ed, David transferred his creative energy, classroom facilitation skills, and team development expertise into the world of product development at Highland. And as a Scrum Master and Agile coach, David helped Highland make the shift from software development to product development by incorporating best practices from the worlds of product design, lean startup practices, and business design into their engagements with clients. Today, David helps Highland's clients figure out the most important problems to solve through gaining an outside-in view of their customers' experience. David, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's so good to be with you, Colleen. Thanks for having us. Yeah,
Oh,
we're really excited about this month of focus on Gen Z.
absolutely. So are we. And I'd love to start off with having you tell us more about Highland and your role there and really how your work does intersect with the association space.
Yeah, Highland has been around, as you mentioned, for about 25 years, and we are essentially an innovation consultancy. For almost our entire history, what we've done is come alongside entrepreneurs, people who have product ideas. And my particular role, and then we help them develop those ideas, sharpen those ideas, and then design them into products, and then actually build the products and actually launch them too. And my particular role is in the area of design research and strategy. And a lot of people don't know what design research actually is. Sometimes I have to explain this to people at parties. What is a design researcher? But a design researcher is just essentially like mostly a qualitative researcher. We use quant tools as well, but a researcher who helps designers get what they need in order to design the best products and experiences for the people that they're designing for. And so we've got all sorts of different tools that come from qualitative anthropology, ethnography, corporate ethnography, human-centered design, all kinds of different tools and methodologies to help designers learn what they need to learn in order to design really effective and powerful products.
That's amazing. And I think we talk so much today about that user experience, and it's probably a lot more understood. So I think what a great time, and especially in the association world who's trying to take those next steps to do things they haven't done before, because a lot of associations for a long time have done what they've done because that's what they've done. So I do think what an incredible role you can play in helping push them and help figure that out too.
Yeah, it does seem our skills kind of line up with the moment for associations. And that's really been amazing for us, right? Because we love to help. We love to help contribute, especially to things that are as meaningful as what most associations do in the world. And yeah, it's been really cool for us too.
That's awesome. So you mentioned it, Highland is 25 years old. What first drew you all to what first drew the company to working with associations, and how has that evolved to where you're at now?
Yeah, it was really interesting. We do digital product development, a lot of digital product development. And we had a few years ago, we had an association come to us, and they had invested a lot of resources and time and energy in building a new mobile app for their users. But when they launched it, they had significant challenges with adoption. And so they were really disappointed in how the launch went. They were really disappointed in adoption. And they came to us and they said, can you help us just understand what's going on? Like why people aren't picking this product up and using it. And so we jumped in and we started to explore, this is our area of expertise. We started to explore what's actually going on behind the scenes here. And we started to see there were some things in the context of the users that they hadn't really taken into account. And then there was some value mismatch as well. What exactly was driving people? We know that value drives adoption. And so, like, people weren't finding the value that they needed right away when they came into the application. But when we started looking at this, like, individual app, we were doing some secondary research. And that's when we started to uncover and understand these deeper trends and patterns of young professional engagement and retention that were really impacting almost every association in the world. And we didn't know that challenge existed, but one of our core commitments, our foundational set of commitments at Highland, is a commitment to human flourishing. And we love the kinds of ties, the weak social ties, and then some of the strong ties that associations are uniquely empowered to create in the world, the sort of social structures they create. And so the thought that like those kinds of social structures, like was the influence of associations wanes, that those kinds of ties would start to disappear from the world, that was really concerning to us. And so that gripped our attention. And so we started to focus on it. And we started to do some original research just in our spare time to try to understand like what were some of these big trends and patterns, what were some of the reasons maybe that were undiscovered behind some of these larger trends around retention and engagement with young professionals.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. In the association world, one of the most talked about things in so many associations is this membership cliff. And we have all of these Gen X and older members. And what are we going to do? And how are we recruiting, retaining this newer group of individuals who don't just automatically join a trade association, which is something that people used to do. That was, how you got your development. Now you go to YouTube and ask a question there, things like that.
Exactly.
It's really interesting. And tell me about the intersection of your focus on research and digital transformation with how that ties into being able to help associations understand how they can engage and retain younger members.
Yeah. So Colleen, essentially, when our research is almost exclusively focused on uncovering unmet and undermet needs, right, in certain populations. And not just uncovering those needs, because it's one thing to say, oh, we found a need that people need, right? And we're gonna meet it. But if you're gonna design a really effective solution for meeting that need, you have to understand like the rich context around it. You have to understand what's going on in that person's life when that need arises. And if you have those things, like you have an understanding of the unmet needs or the undermet needs, how people are currently solving that, and like how satisfied they are with their current solution. Like you mentioned, you go onto YouTube. So a lot of these tools that people are using like are actually really effective tools. And so sometimes they're pretty satisfied with the way that they're solving this need already. But if you can find unmet needs that aren't being satisfied, and then you understand the context around those, you can design some really powerful solutions to meet needs that drive value, that drive engagement, that drive retention for sure.
I love that perspective. And with associations, it always comes back to how can you define your value proposition? And so that has to be different now. It really has to meet those needs you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we find over and over again is that often when associations start to engage this challenge, one of their first impulse, and it's really the most natural impulse, is to think, oh wow, this is like a marketing or messaging challenge, right? We just need to talk more like this generation talks, or we need to be in the places where this generation is, right? So it's like we've got to get on TikTok and we got to start talking
Throw out a
like a Gen
meme.
Z. Yeah, yeah. And those approaches can move the needle some, right? And so you see a little bit, but what we found in our research is that it just doesn't move the needle enough, right? This really is fundamentally a value proposition. You put the nail on the head, right? It's a value proposition challenge. And we've got to understand like, are we actually going to our market with things that they really need, that really meet their needs in the context in which that need arises in their life? Yeah. And that's what we love helping associations do is uncover that.
That's awesome. So we are seeing a lot of associations struggle with declining engagement from younger members or even hesitation to join. So I'd love to know, based on your research, what are some of the biggest reasons that Gen Z professionals and younger professionals aren't joining or staying involved with associations?
Yeah, Colleen, is interesting because they're like on different levels, right? Like these different forces and these trends are on different levels. I'll talk about like some of the high ones first, sort of the higher level trends. The first trend, Gen Z trend that we're seeing, or really it's just among all younger professionals, is a really strong anti-institutional sentiment that's just baked into the generation. And we see this impacting all sorts of different institutions, right? Among young people, there's declining engagement in all sorts of societies, in religious institutions. There is some evidence that's turning around a little bit or changing right now. It's interesting to watch that pattern. But there is a prevailing anti institutionalism that just makes people suspicious of large organizations like associations. And often they have that suspicion without really even realizing that they have it. And so they're just not as inclined to engage with big institutions because they just don't trust them. We also have found, and this was really surprising to us, was in the early days of associations like in their founding days, met really important functional needs, social needs, and emotional needs, right? That's like this really powerful cluster of needs that they met. They did it at a time when people loved to join things and they had time to go and be part of social networks like they were. And like you think about plumbers and it's like, are the plumbers meeting at the bar? I live in Chicago. Are the plumbers meeting at the bar on Friday night? I'm going to be at the bar on Friday night. But this generation, and really most North Americans, have a really strong commitment to work-life balance now. And we didn't realize until we started doing this research how much just that simple commitment to work-life balance actually impacts engagement with associations. So you think about, hey, we're going to provide a networking event, or we're going to provide a local event where you can come together with people who do what you do, and it's going to be on a Thursday night. People are like, hey, Thursday night is family time, right? That's not work, that's family. So this really strong divide between work life and life, that impacts things. The other thing, I'll just mention a couple of other solutions and a couple of other things that we found. One is that there is this really powerful trend that we've noticed amongst Gen Z to hack their own solutions to these problems, right? And you mentioned this, and often they'll use what we call asymmetrical competitors to associations. So these are things like Google, like YouTube, like Reddit, like Discord, like LinkedIn, all of these things that actually meet the needs that young professionals have in different ways than associations do. And what we found is that younger professionals don't see it as a struggle to hack together their own solutions to meeting their needs. They actually enjoy it. They're actually really proud of the solutions that they cobbled together to meet their professional development needs. And so you're not just coming against a trend where it's they're doing something they don't really like doing. They actually love to hack together their own solutions. And so, yeah, those are just some of the bigger trends. Colleen, I could keep talking about this forever, but those are just some of the bigger trends. I think I'll mention one more, and this is actually probably the most important one. And you've already alluded to it a little bit, but when we started getting into trying to understand this dynamic between how young professionals engage with associations, what we found was that joining and staying have now become two completely separate events, and they're completely different decisions. And so when a young professional joins an association, it's typically for a high compliance reason. They need a certification, they need to present at an annual meeting, right? They need to get a specific sort of training, or they're in residency and they get automatically joined into the association, right? So there's the sort of high compliance reason. In the past, when people would join association, they just thought, I'm joining and that means I'm part of my group now and I'm just going to stay. But now joining and staying have become separated, and they are two different decisions, and they require two different selling strategies, and they often have two completely different value propositions that you have to sell to. And so that's where we've really focused, is in that dynamic that we've uncovered between joining and staying. That's where a lot of our current experiments are focused, is like around that particular dynamic.
Man, that's so interesting. What a valuable takeaway for association professionals, because you really then have to approach those recruitment and retention totally differently.
Yeah, yeah. And this dynamic expresses itself in a lot of different ways, and people talk about it in a lot of different ways. So when people notice that joining has become separated from staying, they don't notice that. What you say, what it feels like is, oh, all of a sudden our relationship has become transactional. And that's because they just experience people joining and joining and joining. So that just starts to feel transactional. It's like they're not staying around. And yeah, so we've developed some strategies for engaging that and helping bridge that gap between joining and staying.
That's amazing. I think the other thing that stood out for me too was the part about the work-life balance, because that is such a cultural moment of that being high level discussion. But I had not thought about how that would impact associations ever before. And that just, when you said that, a light bulb went off of, oh, wow.
Yeah, it
You
was the
got-
same for us. Yeah, it was the same for us. It's like you have so many research conversations with people, and you start to see it. You're like, oh man, we're all committed to work-life balance, but that has massive implications for associations trying to meet social needs. It's really striking.
Yeah, it's funny. So I am a millennial, or what Gen Z refers to not so nicely as a geriatric millennial. I'm one of the older millennials. And I remember coming into the workforce, and there were so many stereotypes about millennials that just drove me insane, because I didn't feel like any of those were true about my work ethic and what I did. And I'm just curious if there's any misconceptions you're seeing about Gen Z's relationships with association that the research might dispel.
Yeah, I've already alluded to one of the biggest ones, right? Is this if we just need to learn how to talk like they talk, or we just
Yeah.
need to get on TikTok. It'll solve this problem. I think that's a massive misconception. And then I said that does move the needle a little bit. Want to be where people are, right? But honestly, Colleen, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about this particular generation is, and often I don't hear people say this out loud, but I think that there crept in this perception that this generation's disconnection from associations is a foregone conclusion, right? That this is unstoppable, and this trend, we don't know how to engage it, we don't know how to address it. The things we are doing don't really seem to be working very well. And so people start to think about the inevitability of this cliff, and they just think, man, we don't know how to reach these people. And they start to make the assumption that they're unreachable. And we have actually found that that is not true at all. This is, you actually can engage this generation. I'll tell you a little bit. I talked a little bit about this dynamic of joining and staying. And when we started to notice this, what our first thought from a design perspective was, okay, we've got these two things that are separate from each other. We've got this joining, and this is often grounded in what we would think of as like an anchor event. It's certification, it's licensing, credentialing, that sort of a thing. And then there's all of this enduring value that we know the association offers, that's around like career partnership and career professional development and all of that. And we thought, okay, those two things are separate for young professionals. So can we start to design an experience that would help bridge between the anchor event and the enduring value? Is there a way for us to lead them into the enduring value of the association? So when the decision about whether to stay or not comes to them, they're like, why would I leave? I'm already here. I'm already getting so much value. This association is already a partner for us. So we started to design an experiment with what we call bridge experiences that bridge these two things. And the first one that we did was with a very large science society, and they took a big jump into this hypothesis that we could do this. And we developed a pilot with them around a bridge experience. And in the pilot group, we saw a 49.7% increase in retention among the people that participated in the pilot,
Wow.
as opposed to the people that were in the control group. It was just incredible. So we saw this massive jump in retention. Then we saw this also a really massive jump in the sense of career partnership, like the sense that this association is my partner, as an essential partner in my career development. And then one of the coolest things we saw was that we also saw a massive jump in the pilot group around like their sense of affinity with the mission of the society. And so that like suspicion toward a big institution, a big organization, we saw that this bridge experience actually subverted that suspicion. And all of a sudden, the participants in the pilot group like saw the society as like a partner. It changed the way they saw it. It wasn't like this big, giant, powerful organization. They were an organization that was like really committed to my career development. And we've now begun to replicate and design other bridge experiences for other associations. And we are seeing the same types of results across association. And yeah, like I said, the biggest misconception is that this cliff and disengagement is a foregone conclusion. There are actually ways to engage this, and we're really excited about it.
That's so amazing. I feel like that just probably breathed life into so many of our listeners because I do think you're right. It's a foregone conclusion for a lot of folks that it's just, what are we going to do? It's all over. It was a good
Yeah.
one. Wow. That's amazing. That's so cool to hear about that pilot. I love that. And it's amazing to see that working and the idea of bridging experiences. You have to get beyond just why they joined. That makes total sense when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah, and you want to design the kind of experience that when they get to that decision about staying, it's like, why would I not stay? These people are in my corner. They know what
Yeah.
I need. They deliver it right when I need it. And so, yeah, it completely changes the game around that decision to stay moment.
Yeah. That's so cool. I've been waiting to dive into this since the intro, but the Young Professional Membership Index, I think it's
Yeah.
just such an incredibly unique and a data-driven resource, and it's very comprehensive. So, can you give us that high-level overview of what it measures, why it matters?
Yeah, when we started working with associations and we started to try to help them shift into designing these kind of bridge experiences and making what we see as a really crucial shift between like bringing a roster of benefits to the world, right? This is how associations think of themselves. Like we bring this big roster of benefits, and it's like, why aren't they compelled by this? Why aren't they compelled by this big roster of benefits that we have? And what we found is that what people are really searching for, young people are searching for, are like career partnership experiences, right? Bridge experiences and other types of experiences. But associations are typically not organized to actually deliver on those types of experience. They're organized to deliver, and they have capabilities that support delivering a roster of discrete siloed benefits to the world. And so as we worked with different associations and saw the pain that they were going through of trying to change the way they were structured and change the way they work in order to deliver these types of experiences that we know really resonate with young professionals, we thought, you know what, it would be really helpful to step back and say, what are the factors that enable associations to actually deliver these kinds of experiences that young professionals want? And so we identified 4 factors that we call the enabling factors that we think are the really crucial factors for associations who want to make the shift and start to deliver these kinds of experiences. And then we thought it'd be helpful to build a tool like an assessment instrument and an index that helps organizations just assess where they are on those capabilities, right? To create some shared language around it for associations, right? So people can start to use the same language and think, okay, and also so that they could know where to focus their resources. The resources are limited. And you're always trying to figure out, like, where can we get the most bang for our buck? Where can we really focus? And so we developed the Young Professional Membership Index as a way to help associations assess themselves around these enabling factors, these 4 enabling factors. And then also, because we do it across, it's a national annual assessment, we also get to see, you can compare yourself to how you're doing against peer associations. And because we collect some metrics, right, you can also benchmark your own young professional engagement against your peer associations as well. And we bring this tool because we're so committed to help. We want people to be able to see, like, where should they focus their efforts? Where can they get the most bang for their buck? And so it starts with like a 15-minute organizational snapshot that a membership leader goes in and takes, and then they share that with 5 members of their team, and they go in and take this 15-minute organizational snapshot too. And you get a really quick read initially around like where you should focus.
Yeah, that's such an incredible tool for associations. I think will become increasingly valuable. Quickly though, I want to make sure we differentiate because we're focusing on Gen Zs for the podcast series, but this is Gen
Yeah,
Zs and younger millennials for younger professionals, correct?
it is. Yep,
Okay.
it is. Yeah. And we found, Colleen, in our first year in the survey, last year was our first year. We wanted to ask people, like, how do you define young professional? And so that was actually really interesting, right? We found several different categories of how associations define young professional. And it's all about timing around certain key events. And so 35% define young professional as based on a member's entry into the workforce.
Okay.
Around 30% base it on members' proximity to like their terminal degree or like residency completion. And then 20% were like, it was just really just age of the member. And then 10% based on members' relationship to some sort of certification process. And then the remaining group, that's about 5%, was based on a combination of like member age and entry into practice. And so this people define young professional in different ways, but we felt like it was really important for us to understand like what's the landscape like? How are people defining it? So that was really helpful for us to see as well in the study.
Yeah, that's absolutely helpful. And you talked about those enabling factors. So you had leadership focus, culture of value, strategic alignment, and experience infrastructure. So can you help tell me what that means?
Yeah, yeah. Let's start first with, I'll just walk through really quickly, like all of them. So, leadership focus is essentially like how focused are all of your key leadership groups around the young professional challenge? Can they talk about it in meaningful ways? Are they committed to actually engage it, right? Do they understand the business realities and implications behind significant declines in retention, right? Do they understand like what the real consequences of that are? So in the YPMI, we help leaders assess how they're doing amongst their key groups, their executive team, their C-suite, their senior team, their IT teams, and their boards, right? How are they doing around leadership focus? And then the second enabling factor is what we call culture of value. And essentially, this is all around what does the association actually have the capabilities of uncovering what young professionals need. Like as young professional needs evolve and change, do they actually have the capabilities that they need and the competencies that they need to actually uncover those things? And not only that, but do they have a disposition to actually question whether what they bring to the world is valuable or not? And when we did the YPMI last year, we heard and what we learned was that like leadership teams actually are questioning, right? Like whether what they bring is valuable. So they're starting to question that, but they often don't have the tools that they need in order to do that. So this is around assessing that. And then the third is what we call strategic alignment. And this is essentially, is the young professional engagement challenge, is it baked into your strategic plan? Is it baked into your OKRs? And is there some sort of shared dashboard? Are you tracking the right metrics? Are you looking at the right things? And it's all about, is everybody pulling in the same direction? Do you have cross-functional teams, or is everybody still siloed? And then the last enabling factor is what we call experience infrastructure. And these enabling factors actually are an order of operations too. So you have to start with leadership focus, right? And then you shift into culture of value, because you've got to start questioning value, uncovering new value, designing ways to deliver that value. And then you need strategic alignment, because you've got to start identifying like, okay, how are we going to bake this into initiatives, and how are we going to fund it? And then finally, the last step is experience infrastructure. And basically what this means is, do you have an experimental culture like that is committed to not sort of design things and then launch them into the world, but you've got an experimental culture that like, no, we can start small, we can do pilots, we can experiment, and it's not huge, it's not really expensive if things fail, like we're doing low risk experiments? And do you also have the departmental alignments that make it possible to deliver cross-functional experiences? Because all of the experiences that young professionals want are cross-departmental, right? They don't care that pubs isn't talking to events and isn't talking, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
They're like, they don't see it that way, right? They're like, I have this need right now, who's going to meet it? And so all of these experiences require cross-functional cooperation and like design. And then finally, the last part of experience infrastructure is like, really, do you have like really old brittle technology that can't adapt and enable you to run experiments? Or do you have the kind of flexible technological tools that can enable you to adapt? And we also have added this year in experience infrastructure, we've added a whole series just a little bit of study around the way associations are using AI as well, because we're seeing some really powerful experiments, really successful experiments in AI with some groups that we're working with right now. And so we want to understand how across the association landscape, how are actually people using AI? How is it on their roadmap? Because we found some things that are really effective, and we want to just start to promote that as well. So yeah, those are the enabling factors.
That's awesome. And I'm really excited to see more about what people are saying on the AI front too. So that'll be really interesting. So I get your order of operations there. That makes total sense. Is there one factor that tends to be the biggest gap for associations?
Yeah, experience infrastructure is where the biggest gap
Ah,
is.
okay.
Yeah, it's the last enabling factor, right? So it's
Yep.
the last thing you focus on, right? But so many associations are dealing with really brittle technology systems, right, that aren't flexible and adaptable. And they also don't, most associations don't have a shared experiment playbook, right? They don't know how to run and conduct small experiments. And so they've got really effective project management teams. This is what we've learned is that when we've done this assessment, like project management skills off the charts across associations, but that often doesn't translate into the ability to run experiments. And so, yeah, that's where we see it. And again, if association leaders want to know where their gaps are, like literally it takes 10-15 minutes to get that organizational snapshot. Like the membership leader can go to ypmi.report, and like within about 15 minutes they can take that and see where their strengths are, see where their growth areas are. And then also in that first little snapshot, you have to take a couple more steps to get the full report, but in that first little snapshot you'll see like what leading associations are actually doing to close the gap that you have. And so we wanted to just provide really quick instant value for people that take the YPMI.
I love that. That's so helpful and valuable. And it is nice to have that quick takeaway and then, okay, let's dive in and get a little more. So that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense there. Was there anything really surprising or unexpected that came out of the research?
Yeah, we were looking for correlations, right? What actually moves the needle on retention, or what's correlated with increased retention? And so we were surprised by two things. One is that leadership focus, out of all the enabling factors, leadership focus is the one that's most correlated with increased retention among young professionals and engagement. And so what we see is that when leadership teams actually begin to focus on this challenge and they start to learn how to talk about it, and their board starts to grasp it, and the board starts to see the implications of how these trends, what happens if these trends continue over time, then everything else starts to naturally move toward organizing around it, and amplifies all their existing efforts. So that's really cool. The second thing that was surprising to us is in the first year, it's included this year too in the survey for membership leaders, but we were curious around all the strategies of providing free or reduced membership fees for early career professionals, if that strategy was actually working. And what we found is that it's actually not. Offering
Oh,
free or reduced cost membership for early career professionals actually isn't correlated to increased retention. And that was a little bit surprising to us. And there are a lot of reasons for offering. There could be social or cultural reasons for offering reduced price, right, to your early career members. And that's great. That's actually admirable and good, right? But if associations are considering like a free or reduced price strategy in order to drive increased retention, we're actually finding that's actually not correlated to like higher levels of retention.
wow. Yeah, that is so interesting. I feel like that's the go-to thing
It
to
is.
do to draw in new members. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating. The goal of our podcast is always about leaving our association listeners with actionable, real, valuable takeaways. And I think one of the things I love so much about this index is that it's not just data and numbers, it's real strategies associations can implement. And I know you've already hit on a couple, but I'd love to know what, in your eyes, are a few of those really immediate practical steps that associations can take to strengthen that young professional engagement level.
Yeah. The first, obviously, if you want to focus on what we know really moves the needle, right? Like the first thing is strengthening your leadership focus, right? So this is like educating your senior team, educating your executive team around like the business implications of actually not focusing on this challenge. Because there's so much to focus on right now, so many distractions, right? And so getting everybody actually focused and educated around this challenge is really crucial. I would say if you haven't taken steps in this direction, then that's where you should really focus. And then the second one is really around culture of value. It's what we found when we did last year's study. One of the things we found was that association leaders tend to be swimming in insights from quant tools and swimming in satisfaction data and all this sort of data. But the challenge is that often the data they have, what they tell us is it's not actionable. So it's there, but it doesn't really help them make decisions or redesign their value propositions. And so if you want to if you really want to start to make a difference, I would encourage you to start to consider a bridge strategy around whatever anchor product you have, and then start to do some qualitative research around what happens around that anchor experience for your young professionals and what their first year of professional development looks like after they are involved in that anchor. So trying to understand what happens in their life, what are their professional development needs, how can you show up as a career partner in that particular stage, and then start to take steps to design a bridge experience that helps to bridge that gap between joining and staying.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
love
and
that.
then of course, Colleen, I'm going to also tell people, go to ypmi.report.
Of course.
Take it, and in 15 minutes, you'll know where to focus.
Yeah.
You'll know where to focus. Yeah.
I think it's a 15 minutes very well spent. So I am all behind that recommendation. You've obviously worked with a lot of organizations to improve member engagement and digital strategy, and you gave a little example of that pilot before, but is there something you could build on with that, or another successful case study you could share where you've seen an association who is really able to turn things around from using these data-driven insights?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the associations that we're working with, when we started to do a deep dive into their membership patterns over the last 10 years, what we found was that there were really two different types of members. There were what we called the perennial members, who were the people who joined and stayed, who they joined, but man, they just persisted and they stuck around. And those people were like the people you could count on for volunteering, and they were deeply committed to the association. And then as we started to look at membership patterns, we started to see that there was another category of members that were what we called contingent members, right? So these were folks that just joined and then they didn't stick around. They just joined for this high compliance reason, but they didn't stick around. And when we had those two categories of contingent and perennial, it helped us see that actually the number of perennial members over the last 10 years had declined precipitously. And the organization could feel it internally. They felt like the impact of this, like that the culture was changing, but they didn't have the data to understand it. And so I would really encourage leaders to start to think in those two categories and start to do the analysis to surface that. So now this particular association that we're working with, I mean, they have 5 different major membership initiatives going this year.
Wow.
Every one of those initiatives is focused on turning contingent members into perennial members. It's how can we do that? And one of their efforts that they're doing is taken out of some of what we learned in the pilot, and it's a coaching, it's a sort of a virtual coaching experience or guided sort of career guidance experience that really underscores career partnership. And they are seeing the same sort of retention trends. It's around 48% increase in retention from developing this career guidance thing that's focused on helping shift from members from contingent to perennial status. So yeah, we're seeing it's really cool what we're seeing, but having those categories is super helpful for people.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. One of the other things I hear a lot from association professionals right now in this whole what do we do is that, well, Gen Z just wants informal opportunities. They want digital communities. They don't want a traditional membership model. I know you talked a little bit about the foregone conclusion doesn't need to be there, but what does your research suggest about the future of association membership structures?
Yeah, so we can say this really clearly and like really confidently. Membership structures that deliver on the need that young professionals have for career partnership experiences rather than a roster of benefits, like membership structures that deliver experiences that are oriented around career partnership, are what they are searching for. that is what they need. And when you make that shift from providing a roster of benefits to these designed experiences, that is what makes all the difference. You can shuffle your benefits around into different packages and price them differently and do all sorts of things with those experiments. Or, I mean, that's where people go to. And sometimes there's a little, you can move the needle a little bit, but we find that just rearranging your existing offerings and experimenting with different pricing models and strategies isn't really effective. What is effective is making the shift to providing these career development, career partnership experiences as the heart of your membership model and structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's powerful. And I think it's what associations have to be thinking. I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out here. As Gen Z continues to grow into leadership roles, how do you see association engagement evolving over the next 5 or 10 years?
Oh man, this is such a fun question because it's so one of the things that we know about Gen Z is that they have a really strong orientation toward making over joining. They want to, this comes through in this hacking thing that they love to do, right? Like they want to hack together solutions. They want to create the structure that they're a part of. And of course, they want to have the sense that they're creating the thing that meets their needs. And so I think association leaders need to acknowledge this trend in the way that they design their volunteer and leadership structures. They need to, and Gen Z members can smell tokenism from a mile away, right? Like they know immediately when they're the token Gen Z person on the board or the
Yep.
token Gen Z, they can smell it a mile away. And I know this is challenging, right? Because I know older generations, more seasoned generations, people like me, right? Like often don't want to relinquish what they've got, right? Like they feel like they've earned these seats at this particular table. But if associations are going to really they're going to have to create space, right, for these younger generations to actually lead and make the thing that actually meets their needs. That's a huge trend. Yeah, also models of mentoring, one of the things we find is that Gen Z and they really aren't interested in seasoned mentors.
Yeah.
And the reason why they typically aren't as interested in seasoned mentors is because their perception is that the world has changed so dramatically since the person that they're talking to went through what they're going through right now that they couldn't possibly understand their situation. So they appreciate it for the expertise, like professional expertise, but not career development expertise, right? Because they're like, the world's changed so much, you just can't understand. And so they're really looking for what we call young geniuses. They want near peers. And so volunteer structures, mentoring structures, and that sort of thing, like they've got to support that. And the leadership structures have to acknowledge that they're not really even looking for strong in mentoring, right? Much less in sort of leadership roles. They love it when they see near peers in leadership roles. It's really energizing for them. So I think that's really important to take into account.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It makes total sense too. Okay, that's a good one. Lastly, if you could give association leaders just one piece of advice about engaging and retaining young professionals, what is that top piece of advice you'd want them to have?
Yeah, it's listen to them, get into their world and understand what is actually what are the pressures that they're facing, what are the needs that they have that are unmet, and don't do it in focus groups, do it one-on-one conversations, one-on-one observations where you're listening to eight to 10 people from across a segment and you're just learning as much as you can about their life and their needs, and so that you can align what you bring to them with what they need and how they need it delivered.
Ah, that's so good. David, this has been amazing. And I just so appreciate your insights and everything you all are doing at Highland is really exciting for the prospect of associations and the next generation. But before we let you go, we like to end all of our podcasts with some just for fun rapid fire questions so our audience can
Sure.
get to know you a little bit better. Have you gotten to get away to anywhere fun lately?
Yeah, it was an interesting trip. It was a fun trip. My son had a lacrosse tournament, and so we went and picked him up in here in the Midwest at his lacrosse tournament, and ended up we were trying to figure out a way to just turn that into a little getaway. So we were in southern Indiana, and we rented a little cabin in southern Indiana in the forest there. It was beautiful. But my kids I have urban kids, they're Chicago kids. And so we were deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere, no cell service. They were like, and then we drove for about 15 minutes and we drove into French Lick, Indiana. And there's this amazing hotel there called West Baden Springs. And when it was built at the turn of the last century, it was called like the eighth wonder of the world. And it like emerges out of nothing in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
And we went in and had this big fancy dinner in this huge rotunda that's in the middle of this incredible hotel in the middle of the woods. And my kids they were completely blown away. They were like, Dad, how did you even know this was here? So yeah, that was pretty fun. That was a fun thing we found.
That's so fun. I love it. Next one is, what podcasts are you listening to, if you're a podcast listener, that you'd recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I've got 3 kids who are in the activity phase of life. So my ability to listen, they're in the car all the time. They listen to what the music they want to listen to. I don't really get to listen to podcasts as much as I used to or as I'd like to. But when I get the chance, I really love Ezra Klein. Yeah, I think I'm also reading his new book, Abundance, which I'm finding to be really powerful. He and Derek Thompson put together this book called Abundance, because it's very much focused on the politics of abundance model instead of a politics of scarcity model. And even when I think about associations, I think about you've got what you need in order to solve this problem. And I love that kind of thinking. I love people who think from an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset. And yeah, I go back to Ezra Klein for just the deep analysis and the sustained conversations and the general overall brilliance.
Oh, I'm with you on that one. I have that book on my list. I just heard an interview with him about it, and I was like, oh, I've got to read this. So
yeah,
it's a great concept and thought, for sure.
Yeah, it's really good for sure.
That's awesome. What's one place in the US you've never been to but are dying to go?
Yeah, we are going to get to Acadia National Park in Maine at some point soon. Yeah,
Nice.
we've just got to. We've traveled a lot all over the United States, but we have not been up to Acadia. And I just see pictures and friends that go there, and it just looks so restful and peaceful. And so, yeah, we're trying to get up there.
Awesome. That'll be a great trip for sure. Okay, last one. Finish this sentence. When you see me looking at my phone, it probably means that
I would like you to think that I'm reading some sort of really intellectually invigorating long-form journalism piece, but if you actually looked at me, if you looked at my usage patterns, you'd probably just see I'm mostly looking at Facebook, which is completely embarrassing to say, but I feel like I've got to be honest here at the end of the podcast.
it is what it is.
Yeah, especially right now. There's just so much chatter and so much going on. Yeah, so that's where I am.
Too funny. I love it. David, thank you again. This has been such a wonderfully amazing, insightful conversation, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Colleen. It was really good to meet you. And yeah, looking forward to hearing the rest of this series.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association Insights Podcast, previously known as the Association 100 Podcast, is a production of Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of our newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association? Or do you have some words of wisdom from the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupward.com. That's info@onwrdupwrd.com. Be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association insights and inspiration. Thanks for tuning in.